So far, so good for Notre Dame through this myriad of a college football playoff that just seems to go layer after layer after layer. We have made our way to the semifinal, of course, with Notre Dame taking on Penn State, coming off the huge Georgia win. Nick Shepklowski joining us from Notre Dame SI. Nick, good to see you. How's everything going?
Good. Happy New Year's. I know it's a little we're getting past the Happy New Year time, but hey, it's still college football and in both seasons being played. So Happy New Year's. It's a fine greeting, I think.
Okay, fill in the blank for me, Nick. The Georgia win was the biggest win for Notre Dame since
1993 season for Notre Dame. You can argue whether that was the bowl win over Texas A&M. That was a top 4, top 5 team at the time that should have, looking back, probably clinched a national championship for Notre Dame, seeing as they beat Florida State head-to-head that year, or that win over Florida State that year that was the 1-2 game of the century. The old, if you remember the old intros to games, the old Main Street intro on NBC, it's one of those two. It's a real stinking long time is what it is. That was Notre Dame, and it's so funny how people backtrack pretty quickly right after. Well, even Sean McDonough on the TV call he's given the final call. Well, it wasn't the same Georgia team we've seen in recent years. Well, yeah, okay, great. Don't care. That's the SEC champion. That's the number 2 seed in this tournament, in this college football playoff. That is an absolutely massive win for Notre Dame. That's the one where, whether it was Brian Kelly, Charlie Weiss, pick a former Notre Dame coach since Lou Holtz, that's the one that Notre Dame would go into. You'd get the hype. Oh, is this going to be the time? And then you'd blink, and by halftime, it'd be like 28-3. And then instead, this time, that was a Notre Dame team that went blow for blow with Georgia. They're the ones that made the plays in the middle of the game, the final couple minutes there of the first half, come out and return the opening kickoff of the second half. And I mean, you could have played that game for 120 minutes, and I don't think Georgia would have scored 23 points.
Yeah, regardless of, we know that this is not a vintage Georgia team. However, those teams in those particular years, whether it was the Joe Burrow LSU team, they were the great team of that year. Well, this is the best that the SEC has to offer based on its championship, and Notre Dame was the much better team, as these two teams very similar styles, approaches, running quarterbacks. Now that Carson Beck obviously gave way to Gunnar Stockton, but Notre Dame was just better at everything along the way. And as the game progressed, the difference between the two teams and the front 7 or the front 4 in particular for that Notre Dame defense, just dominating the game and obviously making the game-changing plays.
Yeah, and I think that is something that it's been up and down, a little bit rocky for Notre Dame. Mike Elston was a defensive line coach for a number of years under Brian Kelly. And when Kelly left and took the LSU job, Mike Elston took a job up in Michigan. That's where he went to college, understandably so. And so Notre Dame went and hired Al Washington, used to work at Ohio State. And initially, largely because there wasn't a lot of depth left there in recruiting, it was, oh, wow, this retread Ohio State guy, this is not good. Like, this is a weak part of this defense. And you've seen him be able to put his fingerprints on this defensive line. And really, I think everything you kind of look at with Notre Dame's defense has to also get credited with head coach Marcus Freeman, because he's the one whose philosophy is you can't recruit enough, where previous regimes with Notre Dame were, okay, you land a certain number of 4-star or 5-star guys, and that's enough. And you would see it where Notre Dame would be able to, okay, might be able to compete on the first 35, 40 guys on a roster with a Clemson in the Cotton Bowl, with in Alabama in the Rose Bowl that was played in Arlington that year. But it was that depth that Notre Dame had nothing to offer against opponents. And that's where you're seeing this difference with Marcus Freeman. I mean, you're looking at Notre Dame's defensive line in this game, and it outplayed Georgia. That's 2 All-American guards in Georgia's offensive line in that. This is Notre Dame's like third-string defensive line from the start of the year. They're missing Jordan Botello, who was supposed to be their best edge rusher at the start of the year. Boubacar Traore was same kind of story with him. going into following the Purdue game, going into week 4, he was their team leader in sacks. Then he tore his ACL, was out for the year from there. Riley Mills is their best interior defensive lineman in terms of draft status. He got lost against Indiana. He's done for the year. So, I mean, you're looking at this defensive line, and as well as it played, these are all guys that were second or third on the depth chart at the start of the season back in September.
And of course, Riley Mills is the loss that everyone was pointing to and making a big deal about for a number of reasons because of how good he is. And obviously it being the most recent loss. And you are well aware of this situation since preparing for the game, but it came to light for most of us during the first drive when they were putting up the stats of the Georgia offensive line weight versus the Notre Dame defensive line weight, and there being something like a 45-pound difference per man. But Notre Dame was stout. It was mighty impressive.
Yeah, and that's where Notre Dame hasn't been able to. You've seen very good offensive linemen. I mean, you've seen top 10, top 15 draft picks in the offensive line over the last 10, 15 years. You've seen that's where like you've seen a change. Where you've seen a star defender here. You've seen some very good linebackers. Manti Te'o was obviously outstanding. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was outstanding. They both won Butkus Awards. Jalen Smith won the Butkus Award. But it was almost like in terms of like that front seven, it's like, okay, there's that guy. And then you're the depth wasn't there. Same thing with the secondary. If you want to go back as far back as like Harrison Smith, who's still tearing it up in the NFL all these years later, Kyle Hamilton, 2 very good safeties on this team. But it was kind of like, okay, those are the guys. Throw the ball away from them, pick on somebody else. You'll still be able to probably get yards. And you look at this defense now, and maybe there isn't that absolute star that's out there, whether it's in the secondary, whether it's in the group of linebackers. But you rotate bodies in. And, I mean, you look at this Notre Dame team, I said as much about the defensive line, but like Benjamin Morrison is projected as to be a top, not just a first-round draft pick, but by many, a first half of the first-round draft pick at corner. He got lost for the year in the first week of October, and it's just like, okay, all right, well, Christian Gray will get playing time, and he'll play an extremely high level. It is the depth of this team, and I mean, listen, the injuries are going to catch up if they continue, but the fact that Notre Dame's been able to get this far, play this well against the competition, I mean, what they did to Indiana and now what they did to Georgia, this would not have been possible a couple short years ago with this Notre Dame team.
Of course, Christian Gray, I believe, was the corner that got beaten by Arian Smith down the sideline, the much ballyhooed play. They got penalized for 15 yards, but I think people have made too much of that play. Number one, that's not a penalty in which it hurt Georgia from a down and distance standpoint. They still had a first down and 10 at the 20. It wasn't like it was suddenly 3rd and 22. So a lot of people made way too much out of that. Yes, it cost them 15 yards on the field, but not a down and distance penalty. But that was the one play over the top. And other than that, it was either the Notre Dame secondary was that good, which it has been all season, or just Gunnar Stockton just simply didn't have enough time to throw to even consider going downfield that far.
Yeah, and I mean, it all works together. Al Golden, defensive coordinator, he loves to bring pressure. Always has when you've kind of followed his career when he was at Miami, when he's been at the NFL with the Cincinnati Bengals. He was the linebackers coach on the team that lost the Super Bowl to the Rams a few years ago. Always been a guy that has just lived with pressure. And I mean, I guess that's a full circle moment for him as well this week because you're a fan of the whole picture of college football. You might appreciate this. You might already know this, Mark, but for the audience that doesn't, like you think of Notre Dame and you think of the NBC contract. Okay, well, it's been a good 30 plus years now that Notre Dame's been playing their home games on NBC. The last player before the Indiana game that was on the ESPN family of networks, but the last player to catch a touchdown pass in Notre Dame Stadium in a game that didn't air on an NBC affiliate of Peacock or USA or one of those, none other than Al Golden, tight end for Penn State, when he did so to catch a game-winning touchdown pass way back in 1990. So just kind of a full what are the chances of that type of thing? But full circle moment for him, obviously, this coming Thursday night in the Orange Bowl when the two meet up.
I think I did catch that in the last couple of weeks, probably during the Indiana broadcast. Was that the big snow game?
That was 2 years before.
Okay, before that was in Happy Valley, or was that at Notre Dame? The snow game.
The snow game was at Notre Dame, but there was an all-time, I forget which year it was. Maybe it was the one in between or the year before that it was. They say it was like the coldest game Notre Dame has played in Happy Valley, and I forget what the temperature was, but it sounded miserable. It sounded like nothing that I would want to be a part of in late November.
Yeah, something even worse than what Notre Dame and Penn State played in during hosting their first round playoff games.
Yeah.
All right, we got to Nick Sheplowski here, Notre Dame SI. This is the time to lock in on Nick's work. Absolutely. We're getting down to the nitty gritty with the 4 supposed best teams in college football, and you can catch Nick's work there at Notre Dame SI. And not just the 4 best teams in college football. You could argue pretty easily the 4 best defenses in college football, and Notre Dame doesn't need to take a backseat to anyone. And we obviously kind of diced up the defense